Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Come on over, everybody. That's right. Like, thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. Let's talk about something that really is kind of interesting and shocking when you really think about it. I mean, particularly for me, because, I participated in the South African protests. We wanted to end apartheid and we were going to do it. And look, I can never forget that Sunday morning watching Nelson Mandela walk out of prison. Boy, was that a moment. Was that a moment? And knowing that Walter Sisulu and others were coming right behind him. What a moment. What a moment. And yet, somehow or another, the white children of South Africa have ended up on their feet and they're helping to run the world from the United States. How does that happen? Well, you know what? I had to reach out to Chris McGreal, former correspondent from The Guardian, from Washington, Johannesburg, Jerusalem. And of course, we had him years ago on this show, well, in its other iteration, Chris McGreal. And of course, your book, American Overdose, is the opioid tragedy in three acts. And that was very, very painful. I mean, because to see how people had been pulled into this opioid crisis, I mean, you painted such a stark picture. It was so painful to see. But I tell you what, it was tremendous. And then you now helped us to see something about this PayPal mafia. That's what they're called. I mean, and I almost didn't believe it myself when I started reading and I started connecting the dots. But of course, you did this. How the roots of the PayPal mafia, this is your story in The Guardian, how the roots of the PayPal mafia extend to apartheid South Africa. Wow, everybody. You've got David Sachs, you've got Elon Musk, you've got Peter Thiel, you've got Paul Ferber. You've got a whole lot of them, and they're all ending up here in the United States. But take us back, because some people are saying that, well, maybe it's too facile to connect the dots to take them to South Africa. But when I saw the ADL give Elon Musk a pass on two Nazi salutes in one speech, Chris McGreal, I said, well, I know what I saw. So help me to understand, who are these people and what is their connection to apartheid South Africa? And did they bring that with them here to the United States?
Well, they were all born in South Africa, with the exception of Peter Thiel, who was born in Germany, actually, and then moved to South Africa when he was very young. And they were all educated there to some degree or another, although David Sachs moved to the United States when he was relatively young. But Elon Musk, world's richest man, and certainly a big influence inside the Trump administration, had all of his school education in South Africa, in Johannesburg, in Pretoria, during the last 2 decades of apartheid. Peter Thiel was educated until the age of about 10 or 11 in South Africa, and in what was then called Southwest Africa, which had been actually a German colony until the end of the Second World War, and then was effectively a South African colony in a town called Swakopmund, which we can talk more about. But Swakopmund was notorious for still right into the 1980s celebrating Hitler's birthday. It still had a big German population, or German descended population. Roloff Botha was the grandson of Pik Botha, who was the last foreign minister of apartheid South Africa, and he was the acceptable face of apartheid, or at least tried to be, to the world. Whereas you had a fairly hardline government under President P.W. Botha in the 80s. Pik Botha went around the world suggesting that the country really was open to reform. He was a little like Gorbachev in a sense. He was trying to persuade people that apartheid could be improved rather than abolished. And he even suggested at one point that Mandela could be president, and that got him into a lot of trouble in the 1980s. But this is the milieu in which they were all raised.
Who Tell me, but give me like a bright line overview of each of these gentlemen. I mean, because I know that Peter Thiel. Let's start with him. I think the obvious beginning would be Elon Musk, but I want to go back to Peter Thiel because he got into a bit of a kerfuffle with at least one of his classmates, well, certainly his schoolmates at Stanford, when he said um, that apartheid was a successful economic model. You know, that it was, essentially a good thing. Now, mind you, this is at a time when we've got the shanty towns all over college campuses. I was even arrested at the embassy in Washington D.C. because I was in college there. Um, and who is he?
Well, Peter Thiel, like I say, his parents are German. Um, they brought him to the United States briefly and then to South Africa in the 1970s. Um, his father was a mining engineer, and he was posted to work on a uranium mine in what was then Southwest Africa, is now Namibia, since independence in 1990. Um, that uranium mine was one of several that was source of uranium for South Africa's atomic weaponry, which interestingly, yeah, it developed in cooperation with Israel at the time, although very, very secret.
Mhm.
Um, and perhaps the most extreme element of of Peter Thiel's upbringing is his schooling in Swakopmund, which is this town, this city in Southwest Africa, as it then was, which was notorious even in the rest of South Africa as a place with very German roots. Southwest Africa had been a German colony until 1918, but it had retained a big German population. And if you went to, even going in 1990, to Windhoek, the capital of what was then Namibia, the main street was called Hermann Goering Strasse, not after the Luftwaffe chief, but after his father, who'd been a colonial governor there. So it retained a very strong identity, German identity, but Swakopmund had stood out um, for an allegiance, for want of a better word, certainly a celebration of the Nazis. And the town, or some people in the city, celebrated Hitler's birthday notoriously each May. Gift shops sold items with swastikas on them. They were very unashamed, or at least people in the town were. Some people in the town were in their continued. I'm not sure what, for want of a better word, of the Nazis. And Thiel went to an all German school there. And the people I've spoken to who grew up there in that era say it was impossible to escape the kind of right wing German view of the world. It was very prevalent, at least a part of the population. He left at 10 or 11 and comes to America, with his parents moved to America, and so he comes to America and follows a path that we now know, which is, he goes to Stanford, as you say. At Stanford in the 1980s, it was, as you've mentioned, like a lot of American universities, it was center of anti-apartheid protest, a lot of activity, a lot of encampments, and one of the other students there has recounted confronting Thiel as part of the anti-apartheid protests, and Thiel apparently saying that actually apartheid was a very good economic system, a workable economic system, and successful economic system, and defending it. His spokespeople have since said he has no memory of saying that, but there is an insistence that he did. And as far as I know, he's never been publicly renounced apartheid. He certainly has a view like other, like Elon Musk and others in the so-called PayPal mafia, who helped start up PayPal. Thiel, Musk, Roloff Botha, who I mentioned, David Sachs, they're all part of launching this. They certainly take an extreme libertarian view of the world, which, shall we say, frowns on democracy, and certainly frowns on a lot of what democracies do to try and create more equal societies.
Well, we look at Elon Musk. I mean, it seems his father has framed himself as a liberal now, within the context of an apartheid South Africa, which doesn't end apartheid. It kind of mends it, and you make gradual changes. And didn't he advocate, different governing systems for the different, for, I guess, one for Indians, one for mixed race black people, one for black people, one for white people?
Well, so at the time, in the 1980s, he joined what was known as the Progressive Federal Party, which had been founded in part. One of the founders was Helen Suzman, who was at one point the only member of the all-white South African Parliament that actively and openly opposed apartheid. The Progressive Federal Party split really because in the 1980s, P.W. Botha, who was then the president, in an attempt to persuade the world that he was reforming apartheid, introduced what was called a tricameral system, which essentially was three parliaments, one for whites, one for mixed race people who were known as coloureds, and one for other kind of Indians, other minorities. Absent from this was the black majority, who made up 80% of the population. They didn't have a parliament at all. The Progressive Federal Party was against this tricameral system. Elon Musk's father was in favour of it. He did not believe in one person, one vote, and a single parliament elected by the entire population. So he then leaves the PFP. I mean, Elon Musk's father, that isn't a liberal position, as you can see, but he was, relative to other members of his own family, Elon Musk's family, actually, that was a liberal position. There are much more extreme views inside that family, including neo-Nazi positions amongst some members of the family.
So when you see Elon Musk and the Nazi salute that the ADL says that we need to forgive, we need to give him grace, is that rooted in his history?
Well, I mean, when I first saw the photo, I thought, well, that's the camera's just caught him wrong. But then you look at the video and it seems pretty unmistakable. And I mean, I would say personally that you don't need to be rooted in a history in South Africa to know that that's instantly going to be recognized as a Nazi salute. I don't think there's many people that would see a salute like that and think, oh, that's the Roman sign of friendship or whatever. It's pretty clear what that is. I would add to that, having grown up in 1980s South Africa, where there was an overtly neo-Nazi movement called the Afrikaner Resistance Movement, which modeled its appearance in some ways on the Nazis. It had a three-crooked cross that resembled a swastika in many ways. It used the colors of the Nazi party. A lot of its attitudes were very, very fascist. And they were given to giving that Hitler salute. So I don't think it's very likely that Elon Musk didn't understand what he was doing or instantly recognize that salute. I mean, it seems pretty obvious that it was intended to provoke, I would think.
Well, who is David Sachs, and how did he end up in the United States? And I'm asking you about these people, and Dr. Gibbs, I want you to jump in a minute, because they've all ended up in the same field, and it's a field that has tremendous sway over the country, and over this new world that into which we're entering. Who is Peter Sachs, and how did he end up in Tennessee?
So David Sachs was born in Cape Town to a Jewish family there. He only lives there till he's 5 years old. Then his family moves to Tennessee. But he obviously grows up in a South African family and in that South African diaspora. But he goes on to become part of that PayPal mafia that we're talking about, part of those founders, gets very rich doing that. Sachs, again, adopts those libertarian perspectives that we hear from others in the PayPal mafia. And he is, he was a big donor to Trump, and he is right now chosen by Trump as his crypto and AI czar. So he's very much part of, apart from being yet another billionaire, very much part of the kind of Trump clique of South African libertarian right wingers who've moved into positions of power in this country.
How did they all end up as libertarians? These, as you,
Well, I mean that's a complicated business, and that each of them has different experiences of it. If I were to generalize about some white South Africans I've known on this, and I don't know that I could apply it to each and every one of these, but one of the things you see in the complexities of South Africa in under apartheid, you had two kinds of white people. You had Afrikaners who Afrikaans, they was descended from the Dutch mostly. They were the governing party. They controlled the governing party, and their roots were in what were known as the Voortrekkers, the people that had moved out of the Cape and much deeper into South Africa and taken over large parts of land in wars with the Zulus deep in the country. And then they'd run up against the British once gold was discovered in the gold mines of South Africa. It leads to two Boer Wars. The Second Boer War leads to the defeat of the Afrikaners, and they are essentially colonized under the British Empire. And that experience creates decades of resentment. The British ran concentration camps in which tens of thousands of Afrikaner women and children died. And so the Afrikaners come to power deeply resentful of the British, the English speakers, English-speaking white South Africans. The English-speaking white South Africans, on the other hand, tend to absent themselves from responsibility for apartheid once it's introduced. The apartheid government was elected in 1948. We remember it, of course, because it was rooted in racial segregation and racial oppression. But actually, Afrikaners saw themselves as liberating themselves, in part from British rule, from the English speakers who ruled the country. The English speakers very much benefited from apartheid, but never really accepted responsibility for it. And one of the things that you see later, particularly in the 70s and 80s, is as apartheid fails, as apartheid becomes more and more oppressive in the face of resistance to it, the English speakers, this is a generalization, right? But there's a segment of the English-speaking population that blames the Afrikaner government, puts all the emphasis on them for apartheid. And tends to turn away from government, becomes more libertarian. They are living, the English speakers are living very privileged lifestyles. They live in big houses, drive Mercedes, have swimming pools, have black servants. They have all the benefits of apartheid, but they don't want to accept responsibility for it. So how do they explain that they're entitled to those benefits? They tell themselves it's their own inherent qualities, knowledge, that they're better at capitalism, that they're just their individual qualities have led them to this place, and that takes them down a very libertarian path, if that makes sense, as they try to basically live off the benefits of apartheid while excuse themselves of responsibility for it.
But I cannot help but think that part of their moorings would be racial white supremacy. That this is like a natural order of things for them to be on the top.
Yes, and you'd have to talk to each individual and try and judge. I mean, some people just entirely bought into that. Some tried to tell themselves that they weren't a beneficiary of that and they didn't believe in that, but it turned out conveniently that they were white and happened to be on top. It's hard to believe that if you grow up in a system in which you're educated in what was then called Christian national education, which which was very put a great emphasis on racial superiority, that hasn't in some way conditioned, at least a segment of the population to the white population to believe that they are indeed racially superior. Now, lots of people didn't buy into that. There are plenty of examples, including at Elon Musk's high school in Pretoria, of white people who turned away from that. Edwin Cameron, who went on to become a Supreme Court justice after the end of apartheid, is a very good example of that. Peter Hain, who led the anti-apartheid movement in Britain and became a Labour MP. So, it's perfectly possible for people to turn away from that. But I would say that they perhaps were the minority.
Hmm. Dr. Gibbs, what say you? Because he has a new book, Chris McGreal. It is The Revolt of the Rich. It takes us into, I guess one would say, the period just beyond the Civil Rights Act, right? When we had the great Civil Rights Acts that culminated in the 60s. And and that would be part of and there was also an economic revolution. So his book, The Revolt of the Rich, quite frankly, is quite timely. And so what do you make of this right now? I mean, just given where we are as an historian, what do you see?
Well, I want to commend Chris McGreal for doing a very nice job, integrating the basic facts of this PayPal mafia into the history of South Africa. I suppose the only thing I would just add to that is that these men, when they were growing up in South Africa under apartheid, it was, of course, as Chris noted, ruled by the Nationalist Party, which during World War II, before they came to power in 48, but during World War II, they were effectively pro-German. They supported the German side in World War II. So they're, in addition to the fundamental white supremacy that was at the core of their ideology, they did have this long-standing association with Nazi Germany. And of course, in Namibia, you had an additional connection to Germany through the German colonial regime, as noted. So that was the context in which Sachs, Musk, and Thiel grew up in this society. That was indeed not only connected to white supremacy, but definitely had some close associations with the ideology of Nazism as practiced in Germany. It is difficult and perhaps unpleasant to watch Elon Musk give what is unmistakably a Sieg Heil salute at a presidential inauguration. I've never seen anything. I've seen quite a few presidential inaugurations. I've never seen anything like that. That is extraordinary. And it's difficult to believe it was, quote unquote, just a joke or an accident. It does raise disturbing questions about Musk and to some extent about American society, that this was a presidential inauguration here. The ADL is practicing realpolitik. The Trump administration is officially very enthusiastic about what Israel is doing in the Middle East, even though they've maybe backed away a little bit on the issue of the Gaza peace agreement. The United States is backing Israel to the hilt, and so I assume that's the ADL's position. I suppose the general point I would make here is that you are seeing this not only in the United States, this move towards a kind of racially charged kind of right-wing movement, which we are seeing here. This is also in Europe. I mean, we see in Germany, the Alternative for Deutschland is the second biggest party in Germany, and that has some disturbing connections in German history. They do seem to want to whitewash the Nazi past, for example. In France, you have the National Rally, which is also the second biggest party in France. It's very possible their leader may be the next president of France. That's a possibility. So we're seeing this on both sides of the Atlantic here in ways that are disturbing. And I'm disturbed by it, obviously. I think other people should be too. I think one has to accept the fact that it reflects very badly on the political establishments and the major parties that have made this possible. One of the reasons people have turned to Trump, I think very foolishly, but obviously a sizable part of the population did turn towards Trump in this last election because of the failure of the establishment both the extreme widening in the distribution of wealth to the disadvantage of the majority, the stagnation and decline of wages for most people, the fact of endless wars, which have been expanded under Biden, by the way. I mean, obviously, the war in Ukraine, of course, was a massive expansion, basically, of America's commitment to permanent wars. The decision to back Israel to the hilt that began with Biden. So I think all of these things helped create the context in which people would turn to a figurative man on horseback, even if it's an unpleasant demagogue like Donald Trump. So I see this as a fundamental failure of the political system, that we're now in a position, we're inaugurating a president, and in the inauguration you have a Hitler salute. That's where we're at.
Chris McGreal, because I have to tell you, Dr. David Gibbs and Chris McGreal, as I really started, reading about David Sachs and Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and others. I mean, even Robert O'Brien, I think the NSC advisor under Trump, who went to university in South Africa. And I said, now that's interesting. And it's a little odd because I don't know too many white people in the United States who would have chosen to go to university in South Africa, but okay, that was interesting, particularly in the 80s. Come on now, this is, I mean, because we've had Mandela as president, and we now have the ANC effectively in charge. At least their government at this time is in charge of South Africa. We don't even realize what a momentous event it was for Mandela to come out of prison. No one ever thought he was going to get out of prison, ever. Or Walter Sisulu and all of those who were in the ANC. That having been said, my question is now, as I started making these connections, I wondered, because Peter Thiel he's an interesting guy who doesn't even think women really ought to be able to vote. It's just different. How would they, and so when I hear J.D. Vance, and he is J.D. Vance's sponsor, and these interesting positions that he has on women, I go, there's some moorings here. So help me to understand how these South Africans are shaping American society now. Or do you think that that's a bridge too far? Chris McGreal.
Well, no, clearly they're shaping. I'd say Elon Musk is shaping South African society, and actually, he's shaping Germany, he's shaping Britain to some degree. At least it seems in a very, as David mentioned, you've got the far right AfD in Germany, and Musk is openly campaigning for them when there's an election on. He's openly attempting to bring down the British government. Mostly by totally misrepresenting its positions, but so undoubtedly he's influential. I mean, I do wonder how long he's going to last under Trump. Firstly, because I don't think Trump likes a figure to overshadow him for very long, and I think throwing your arm up in Nazi salutes you can get away with maybe once or twice. I'm not sure how much he's going to be able to do that. And clearly Musk is full of his own sense of power. I wonder if that's not going to conflict with Trump. But yes, in the meantime, I mean, if we look at what's been happening over the past few days with the Trump administration, you look at the office of I've forgotten the name of it now, but the U.S. office
of DOGE
for personnel management, the one that's basically just sent out that message to 3 million civil servants telling them, you can sign up to leave now or you might be booted out. Actually, if you look at it, it's Elon Musk's fingerprints are all over that, including the
header.
The subject line, yes, exactly. Plus, somebody who's just worked for him, his AI company has just moved over to be the chief of staff in that department. So you can, and plus it fulfills what Musk said was his intent. So yeah, Musk clearly has influence. One can only imagine Thiel will have influence. He's going to be a crypto czar and an AI czar. These are two of the most important, modern technological developments in this country, and we don't really know where they're going. So undoubtedly, Sorry, I mean David Sachs is going to be that, is he not? Yes, David Sachs is the AI. But anyway, you can see how these South Africans are yes going to have real power and real influence.
They do have real power and real influence, and that's why I'm trying to, because when you look at these civil servants that they're looking at, what they've given them their walking papers. One of the concerns, and I've been talking to some people, we're going to be talking with them over the next couple of days, union members, because of course many of these government workers are unionized. A real part of the spine of the Black middle class are these jobs. Dr. Algernon Austin from the Center for Economic and Policy Research, brilliant economist. He's head of their race and economic project. He estimated that 100,000 Blacks, for example, will lose their jobs. And of course, DEIA impacts women overwhelmingly. The LGBTQIA plus community. I mean, and on and on and on. And these persons appear to be very hostile to all of those communities, and Peter Thiel, that's very interesting to me because he's an openly gay man, right? And yet he's hostile to this community and to these other unvoiced and really oppressed communities. Can you help me to understand that thinking? I mean, because, when I read about Elon Musk, he was beaten up as a child. He has a very difficult relationship with his father. He calls his father the worst person he's ever known. Wow. Apparently his father was abusive, and it's a lot. What are we looking at? Who are these people, Chris McGreal?
Well, each comes with their own experience, and they also evolve. I mean, they were in school in South Africa 40, 50 years ago, so
right.
I think that obviously is part of what shapes them, but it's not their entire experience. I've seen speculation that Musk is greatly influenced by the fact that one of his children is transsexual, and that feels very strongly that that's. But, and there's family influences. I mean, if you wanted to look at a family influence, there's Musk has one very interesting one. The reason he was able to get a Canadian passport and leave South Africa is that his grandparents were Canadian. His grandfather, who was a man called Joshua Haldeman, in the 1930s headed a Canadian branch of a party called the Technocracy Incorporated. It was actually a US party or US movement, which favored a technocratic dictatorship over democracy, which, may offer some clues. That party or that movement in Canada, at least, took on very fascist overtones in the 1930s with uniforms and all the rest, and in fact was banned by the Canadian government during the Second World War because of its sympathy for Hitler. After the war, what you see is that Haldeman found another party, which is openly anti-Semitic, and then in 1950 emigrates to South Africa because he likes the sound of apartheid, and actually becomes very, very enthusiastic supporter of apartheid. And Elon Musk's father has described the grandfather as an open supporter of Hitler, as a version of Hitler. So you get, that, but I think that the idea of a technocratic dictatorship clearly was floating around inside the Musk family. Was that part of it? I don't know, but it'd be a hell of a coincidence if not.
But because they're at the top of that. I mean, they're shaping America in that way, and the world. I mean, it's a technocratic world. I mean, and they are, and the speculation has been that a lot of these civil servants are being removed to be replaced by AI. I mean, and so I'm trying to understand their philosophy. What is their thinking? I mean, what do you read into this, Dr. Gibbs?
I would say that it is very significant in my view that these men were from South Africa, that they were heavily exposed to things like white supremacy and to some degree Nazism even. I'd say the dominant ideology of these men is libertarianism, and the right of people to make money any way they want, and they use it any way they want, basically, without any significant restraint on what they do with their money and how much they keep and so on. All of these things, I think, is very popular in Silicon Valley and very popular with extremely wealthy people for obvious reasons that it suits their interests. The idea of a technocracy, I didn't know about this technocracy ideology, but it fits in perfectly with the ideology of libertarianism in the sense I don't get the impression, I've never had the impression, that libertarians are very enthusiastic about democracy. They're enthusiastic about what they call freedom, which means mostly freedom for the very wealthy to do whatever they want with their money and not to have it taxed or regulated. Um, and so it's not very surprising to me that they believe in a technocracy. I suspect that is their fundamental ideology. Generally speaking, very wealthy people, especially in Silicon Valley, are very drawn to this kind of view of the world. And so I think that's the dominant issue as I would see it. The white supremacy aspect is there, but I think the libertarian aspect is probably much more pronounced. I'm probably going to have to go in a moment, but yeah.
What would you like to say before you go?
Well, that in the Trump administration presents itself as populist. Trump is a man of the people, and so on. But I think the real nature of the Trump administration is going to be seen in people like Elon Musk, and that's going to reflect the fact that he's very possibly the richest man in the world, certainly one of the very richest, and he's acting in his interest on the basis of an ideology that is suited to the very richest. And the results we'll get from this are likely to be anything but populist in terms of their effects.
Dr. David Gibbs, author of, I mean, the rich, they are having a great time. It's like, I don't know if if it's a revolt or if they're taking revenge. I don't know. But the revolt of the rich, get the book, everybody. Sending you so much love, Dr. David Gibbs.
Thank you, Santita. Nice to meet you, Chris. Bye-bye.
You too.
Chris McGreal, I mean, help me to understand. I would just need to know what we're looking at, because is it correct to connect the dots to South Africa, to apartheid South Africa? And of course, I would, just given South Africa's history, I mean, they shaped Gandhi. Many people don't really think about that, but he was brought into an awareness when he saw how privileged he was not when he was practicing law in South Africa, right? And South Africa looms much larger in our lives. You know, when I've talked to different people, I'm like, did you know that these 3, 4, 5, 6 figures come from South Africa? People are a little surprised, a little more than surprised. They're shocked. And I think those of us who might be a little bit more vigilant are unsettled. I certainly am, Chris McGreal. I can never, and I've been to South Africa, and I've been to South Africa right after President Mandela, well, then just Nelson Mandela had been released. And I see the connections between South Africa, of course, and Great Britain. Interestingly, my parents you kept hearing that Mandela was going to be released, right? And so my father knew enough to go to England first before he took that long trek to South Africa. So he went to see Margaret Thatcher. He and my mother did. And she was the one who told them, Reverend Jackson, Mrs. Jackson, he will be released on Sunday, so you should leave here now. Because I think they were meeting with her on a Saturday. You need to go on and get the plane now. It's going to take you, a day, half a day to get down there, 12, 14 hours, because you're flying to the bottom of the earth, everybody. And it's when you go there, and you have been a correspondent there, I really do feel the weight of not just white supremacy, but I feel the weight of Nazism when I'm there. I do feel it. Because the racial lines, even today, they're there. I mean, so-called colored people and Indians live together. The The dark-skinned Africans live in another place, and whites and more affluent whites live behind the gates, and that's in 2025. And I'm wondering if they're bringing that here. Because I have not seen. I have to tell you, Chris McGreal, to see not one but two Nazi salutes. He did it going forward, and then he turned around and I guess to the crowd behind him.
Yeah.
It angered me as an American to see that. I'm like, how dare you bring that garbage here?
Well, I mean, I think find plenty of people here who,
Oh yeah, I mean,
push that kind of garbage, and we've just seen some of them released from prison by the president, right?
Well,
I mean, I think the thing to bear in mind about South Africa, it was a very strange and unusual place in which these people grew up.
How
but
so?
It's all, well,
How
in that it was really the last bastion of legislated white supremacy left. But it's also worth bearing in mind that what you had to say about Gandhi was true, but that was the 1930s, before apartheid. And it's worth bearing in mind that, that was essentially, they didn't call it apartheid, but that same system of racial discrimination existed throughout the British Empire, or at least in Africa and India and elsewhere, which is what Gandhi was resisting. So, apartheid was perhaps more extreme in some of the things that it did. And it was obviously caught out by history because you have decolonization in the rest of Africa. But in the 1930s, when Gandhi was protesting about segregation in South Africa, it wasn't unique. It was extremely common in the European colonies. And you only had to go to Kenya in 1930s to find that out, So, and as we know well, in the United States at the time as well. So South Africa, to some degree, was caught out by history, caught out by time. When everybody else was retreating from this ideology, it was solidifying it and entrenching it as it tried to fight it out, and it lost. But yes, that clearly had an influence, and it is genuinely shocking to think that in this day and age, given everything, given that we've just marked the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, that somebody so close to the centers of power should give Nazi salutes, or what appear to be Nazi salutes, make no effort to apologize if they've genuinely made a mistake, and that it seems to be excused by all kinds of people for their own interests. Yes, that is genuinely shocking at this age. I agree.
Well, I mean, but that's why I brought up my trips to South Africa, because a lot of what I see with the white population even now is not far removed from Nazism. I mean, just
I would say I wouldn't. The parallel I wouldn't necessarily draw is with Nazism, because Nazism really was about racial extermination in many ways. And I don't think I would draw more of a parallel with the history of colonialism. And
I mean, in terms of their style, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
in terms of, I don't think the white population of South Africa is in any way exterminated.
Not all of them. Let me say this. When I think of the, because you don't see that there now. That's not what I'm saying. And I must admit, I am very sensitive as a Black person. When I go there, not that you're not, but it was something I felt the weight, and it was worrying. And because there were still places when Nelson Mandela was released, my brother went downstairs. My brother Jesse went downstairs to get something from one of the shops in the hotel, and the security became very agitated. They told my mother said, "Well, what's the problem?" And they said, "You have to understand, your son is colored. He will be killed right now," because there was just so much that was going on, at that moment. And my mother didn't read colored, but he did. And and that is Black life, Chris McGreal. I mean, you have to, navigate all of those things. And so when I see a South African, it has me feeling some kind of way. just as a black person, just given what they've done, because they did exterminate so many people. I mean, and it had appeared to be their job. And so when I see them here, I'm trying to figure out if they feel that America is their nirvana, is the like the promised land for them. I mean, they abandoned South Africa? Uh, What are they doing here?
Making money.
Okay, that's
I
it.
mean, that's their nirvana. Yes, I mean, I think they bring the attitudes that we've been discussing. They bring the experiences and upbringings we've been discussing. But what drew all of them here, I suspect, is the fact that they can make vast amounts of money that they were unlikely to make in elsewhere in the world, and they've all become extremely rich, all become billionaires
Extremely.
through technology.
How could they socially re-engineer our society? I mean, many people are very upset about what's happening on X, because X has become, many people feel, a home to the far right wing. Um, is what does this mean, and what might happen if he buys TikTok, or controlling share in TikTok? I mean, how can he reshape our discourse?
Yes, so I mean, part of, as David was describing, part of that uh, uber libertarian position is total freedom of speech, at least for them and the people that support them. Um, and I think that is where you're quite right, where we are seeing shaping of discourse, particularly on X now. Uh, uh, Moderation has what it's been killed on Facebook as well now, but
Yeah.
moderation is now uh, passe, and it's really anything goes, and that does have a huge influence on society. You're absolutely right. It's any truth. Uh, it, Truth is what I wish to believe, not what the facts are. Um, and we've seen Musk very committed to that idea. You only have to look at what he retweets, and it's clear
Mhm.
that a lot of what he retweets is highly misleading at best. Um,
Well,
but
yes, because initially you didn't peg him with the far right. He's always been libertarian to me, but you weren't quite sure where Elon Musk was politically. You didn't tag him with the far right, but now he's associated with the far right. He seems very comfortable. Um, I don't know if, and I understand about his. He's very bothered by having a child who's trans, and there's that. Um, I'm trying to figure out where this train is going. Y-
well, I don't think any of us really know, do we, any more than we really know where the Trump train is going. We we may know where they'd like it to go, but
Mhm.
as today's political developments show, um, there are obstacles on the track. They were forced to back down over the grant freezes today, which would
Mhm.
have had a very profound effect on millions of people in Africa who rely on
Medicare, Medicaid,
well,
everything.
and drugs against
Yeah.
HIV/AIDS under PEPFAR. So um, we don't know where that's going. I mean, we can speculate about what Musk wants and how right wing his beliefs really are. There's clearly a part of Musk that enjoys the provocation. There's clearly
Mhm.
a part of Musk that enjoys the power he derives from that provocation. Um, and I don't know whether he believes everything he retweets or whether he does it as a matter of principle, that he sees it. This is just free speech, and so it should be out there. I don't know to what degree he just does it because he likes provoking his enemies or opponents, his critics. Um, but clearly, it is having an impact on society. Yes, and
It is
not.
shaping. That's why I wanted to know: is this performative or is this philosophy? I don't know. I don't. I'd feel more comfortable if I knew what this was, but I'm just coming around to the understanding that all of these persons, really, they are products of an apartheid South Africa, and that does make me distinctly uncomfortable. I mean, because I'd like to know what everybody bandies about all of these terms. I mean, what is fascism? I mean, what is Nazism? Can you give me like a snap definition of either or both?
Oh well, but I mean, Nazism is one branch of fascism, and it's essentially fascist idea is rooted in the idea of racial superiority.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely right. Um, and so I mean, and it's no great surprise that the South African model proved to be lean towards fascism. It identified, as David said, quite closely with fascism in the 1930s. When the year that Musk was born, 1971, South Africa had a prime minister at that time called John Vorster. And John
Mm-hmm.
Vorster was a big proponent of something called Christian nationalism. And in 1942, he said, and I'm going to paraphrase him here, in Germany they call it fascism, in Germany they call it Nazism, in Italy they call it fascism, in
Mm-hmm.
South Africa we call it Christian nationalism.
Mm-hmm.
It's all the same anti-democratic principle. And he identified Christian nationalism very closely with Nazism and fascism. And 30 years later, he was the country's prime minister. And the education system it was called Christian national education. So it's not hard to draw, the direct connections there. But as with Franco was a fascist leader of Spain.
Mm-hmm.
Time goes by. Certain things are less acceptable on the world stage, particularly after the Holocaust. So outright extermination of whole groups of people in the way that the Nazis pursued it was somewhat less likely. But if you look at the laws that were introduced in the 1950s, in particular under apartheid, they very much resemble in many ways the Nuremberg laws that the Nazis wrote against Jews. Absolutely, about restricting where people could live, restricting professions, controlling people's lives. And I guess the black equivalent back then of a yellow star was the passbook,
Yeah.
which greatly restricted where you went. So the mentality, yes, could be very similar in many ways.
So, and I think that's, as we conclude, I think that is what I'm really getting to, the philosophy. It's phenotype, of course, matters, right? But it's the philosophy. It's what it is that they are, the society that they're seeking to create here. What are they doing? I mean, particularly when I look at JD Vance, who is someone who's kind of shapeshifted, right? And he's, he puts things in a very elegant way, but then but he says things that fit into well, I mean, to me, they are extremist. And that's why I'm asking, where are we going? What just kind of help put a bow around all of this? Because, I mean, should we connect the dots between them and South Africa? And then as we look at these different philosophies that have cycled uh, through Europe, I mean, and through our lives, Christian nationalism, fascism, et cetera, now. I mean,
Well, I think you can't. I think you would have to say in each of these men's cases, to some degree or other, obviously the South African upbringing, or at least part of their childhood in South Africa, will have had an influence and bearing on them. But is it the only thing? No, as David pointed out, they're strongly libertarian for their own reasons, justifying becoming rich. And so, there is an inherent contradiction between libertarianism up to a point and fascism, because fascism is very about very authoritarian government, which they say they're opposed to. But it's possible to pick and mix, and certainly you can imagine circumstances in which supposed libertarians actually very much favor, in the name of individual freedom, a very authoritarian form of government.
I'm wondering if that's where we're heading. It seems like it because when I look at technocracy, if you will, we're getting more and more limitations. They don't want you to spend cash. Everything is going on your phone. It's just, and it just seems that we are less and less free. Just my thought. But Chris McGreal, of course, you have been everywhere, having been a correspondent for The Guardian in Washington, in Jerusalem. I've got to get you back on to talk about the Middle East. I want to pick that brain of yours. And of course, Johannesburg. I'm just so glad that we were able to reconnect and I could get you back here. And you know what? We're going to talk more as we look at what happens with our health in this country. We want to dig back down into the opioid crisis because that is looming so large. I mean, everyone, please get this book. I mean, it is American Overdose. When you see how these pharmaceutical companies poured these drugs into these communities, I guess the parallel for me, Chris McGreal, is, Gary Webb found that the crack had been dumped into the black community. Um, and drugs had been dumped into the black community really to thwart the forward movement of the civil rights movement. And it's just very, very painful. But I tell you what, you need to get this book, everybody. And I want to have you back on so we can just go back over this book so that we can really understand what we are looking at. Blessings to you, Chris McGreal. Thank you so much for responding to me today. I'm so glad that we were able to catch back up. It's good to see you.
You too.
Blessings to you, everybody. And blessings to you, Chris McGreal. I'm Santita Jackson. It's AM 950 Radio. God bless you, everybody. Have a great one.